I am Zara, 33 years old, and a successful art curator. But 8 years ago, I was just a struggling single mother watching my father destroy my son's spirit. At his extravagant 60th birthday gala, my 7-year-old autistic son handed him a vibrant, deeply complex painting he had spent 3 months creating just for him. My father took one look at it, scoffed, and shoved it directly into a trash can, overflowing with champagne bottles. He told me to get my broken child out of his sight before he ruined his public image with cheap finger paints. I did not shed a single tear. I pulled the painting from the garbage, wiped it clean, took my son's hand, and walked out. What my father did not know was that 8 years later, that exact discarded canvas would sit on an auction block starting at $500,000. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect your child from toxic people who share your blood. The air inside my father's Buckhead mansion was thick with the scent of expensive cigars and roasted prime rib. It was a crisp November evening in Atlanta, and Calvin, a man who built a ruthless real estate empire from the ground up, was holding court in his grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over 50 of the city's wealthiest elites. Politicians, property developers, and socialites mingled, sipping vintage champagne and laughing at jokes that were not particularly funny, just because my father was the one telling them. I stood at the edge of the room holding the hand of my 7-year-old son Malik. Malik is on the autism spectrum. Loud noises and crowded rooms usually overwhelmed him, sending him into a spiral of sensory overload. But tonight he was fighting through the anxiety. He was wearing a tiny suit that I had bought on clearance and tailored myself, his small fingers gripping the edges of a large canvas wrapped in plain brown paper. He had spent 3 grueling months working on this painting. While other children his age were watching cartoons, Malik was in our cramped 2-bedroom apartment, mixing acrylics, layering textures, and pouring his entire soul onto the canvas. Because he struggled to speak in full sentences, art was his voice. It was how he processed the world. And tonight he wanted to give his masterpiece to his grandfather. My father never understood Malik. To Calvin, a child who did not make eye contact and flapped his hands when he got excited was not a grandson to be proud of. He was a liability, a flaw in the perfect family portrait he had curated for the public. But Malik loved him with the pure, unconditional innocence that only a child possesses. We approached the head table where my father was seated. He was flanked by my older sister Kendra and her husband Trent. Kendra was 35 and draped in diamonds bought entirely with our father's money. She had never worked a real job in her life, perfectly content to be the beautiful, dependent daughter who nodded at everything Calvin said. Trent, her white husband, was a smooth-talking opportunist who leached off my father's wealth while walking around with an unearned sense of superiority. Grandpa Malik said softly, his voice trembling slightly over the jazz music playing in the background. He stepped forward, holding out the wrapped canvas. "I made this for you, for your birthday." The conversation at the table ground to a halt. My father slowly turned his head, looking down at my son, as if a stray dog had wandered into his dining room. He did not reach out to take the gift. He just stared at the brown paper packaging with visible distaste. "What is this, Zara?" my father demanded, looking past Malik directly at me. "I am in the middle of a conversation with the city councilman, and you let him interrupt." "It is a painting, Dad," I said, keeping my voice steady and respectful. "He worked on it for 3 entire months. He wanted to give you something special for your 60th birthday. Reluctantly, my father snatched the canvas from Malik's small hands. He tore the brown paper away with rough, impatient movements. The painting was revealed. It was a breathtaking, hyper-detailed, abstract piece. Swirls of deep blues and striking golds clashed and blended in a way that showed a level of spatial awareness and emotional depth far beyond his 7 years. It was brilliant. But my father did not see brilliance. He saw a mess. He scoffed a harsh, dismissive sound that cut through the music. Without a second of hesitation, he turned and shoved the canvas directly into the tall silver champagne bucket positioned next to his chair. The edge of the painting plunged straight into the melting ice and discarded bottles. "I do not have space for cheap finger painting in my house." "Zara," my father growled loudly enough for the surrounding guests to hear. This is a formal event. Get him out of here before he has an episode and ruins my night. The breath left my lungs. I watched the icy water seep into the bottom corner of the canvas, threatening to ruin the acrylic layers my son had painstakingly applied. I looked down at Malik. His bottom lip was trembling, his wide brown eyes darting from the trash can to his grandfather's cold face. He did not understand. He had given his grandfather a piece of his heart, and it had been thrown away like garbage. Kendra let out a sharp, mocking laugh from across the table, taking a slow sip of her wine. "Oh, please, Zara," she sneered. "What did you expect Dad to do with that? Hang it in the foyer next to the imported sculptures. You are always trying to force everyone to pretend your kid is some kind of prodigy. It is embarrassing." Trent leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms with a smug, arrogant grin. "Maybe stick to coloring books, buddy." Trent chimed in, his tone dripping with condescension. "Special needs arts and crafts do not exactly match the aesthetic here. You should really teach him some boundaries, Zara, before he embarrasses your father in front of the real investors." The sheer audacity of Trent. A man who lived rent-free in a condo my father owned, speaking down to me about boundaries made my blood boil. But I did not scream. I did not cry. Years of navigating their emotional abuse had taught me that giving them a reaction only fueled their cruelty. They wanted me to break down. They wanted me to drag Malik out of the room in tears, cementing my status as the erratic, struggling single mother who could not measure up to the family standard. I was not going to give them that satisfaction. I stepped forward, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. I reached right into the champagne bucket, ignoring the freezing water that soaked my sleeve, and pulled the painting out. I carefully brushed the ice off the back of the canvas, making sure the paint itself was unharmed. I looked my father dead in the eye. The silence around the head table was absolute. The city councilman and the other wealthy guests were staring, waiting to see how the disgraced middle child would respond. "You are right, Dad," I said, my voice dangerously calm and entirely devoid of the warmth I had walked in with. "This does not belong in your house. It is entirely too valuable for someone who cannot recognize true worth unless a price tag is attached to it." My father's face flushed with anger. "Do not take that tone with me in my own home," he warned, pointing a thick finger at me. "This is exactly why you are struggling, Zara. You lack respect. You refuse my financial guidance, you refuse to conform, and you insist on dragging this broken child around expecting the world to accommodate him. You are a failure." "I am a mother," I corrected him sharply, "and my son is not broken. The only thing broken in this room is your ability to feel anything real." I turned to my sister and her husband, who were watching with wide eyes, shocked that I was actually talking back. "And Trent," I added smoothly, "I buy my own groceries and pay my own rent. The next time you want to give me advice on aesthetics or boundaries, make sure you are not living in a house my father pays for." Trent's smug smile vanished instantly, his face turning a blotchy red as Kendra gasped in offense. I did not wait for their rebuttal. I knelt down right there in the middle of the ballroom and took Malik's face in my hands. I forced a gentle, reassuring smile onto my lips, masking the absolute fury raging in my chest. "Your painting is beautiful, baby," I whispered to him, ignoring the stares of the Atlanta elite burning into my back. "It is a masterpiece. Grandpa just does not have the right lighting for it here. We are going to take it home and keep it safe." Malik nodded slowly, his small hand gripping the fabric of my dress. I stood up, holding the damp canvas securely under one arm and holding my son's hand with the other. I did not look back at my father. I did not say goodbye to the guests. I simply walked out of the grand ballroom, down the sweeping marble staircase, and out the heavy oak front doors into the cool November night. I drove us back to our tiny apartment in silence, the painting resting carefully in the back seat. I promised myself right then and there that I would never again allow my son to seek validation from people who viewed his existence as a burden. I was going to protect his gift. I was going to build a life where we never had to ask Calvin for a single dime or a single ounce of approval. What my father threw away that night was not just a canvas. He threw away the last shred of loyalty I had for that family. He discarded us. But in doing so, he handed me the exact fuel I needed to build my empire. And 8 years later, he would learn exactly how expensive that mistake was going to be. The icy water from the champagne bucket dripped down my wrist, soaking into the cuff of my only decent dress. I did not flinch. I carefully wiped the moisture away from the edge of the canvas, using the fabric of my skirt, protecting the vibrant acrylics my son had so painstakingly layered. I gripped Malik by his small, trembling hand. I did not scream at my father. I did not hurl insults at my sister or her smug husband. They wanted a reaction. They wanted the chaotic, struggling, single mother narrative validated right there in front of the Atlanta elite. I refused to give them the satisfaction. I turned my back on the head table, leaving the silence hanging heavily in the grand ballroom. We walked out. The heavy oak doors of the mansion shut behind us, cutting off the jazz music and the suffocating scent of expensive cigars. The cold November air hit my face as we descended the sweeping marble steps toward the driveway. My beat-up Honda Civic sat parked at the very edge of the estate, dwarfed by a sea of gleaming luxury vehicles. I buckled Malik into the back seat. He was perfectly silent, his small fingers rhythmically tapping against his knees, a self-soothing mechanism he used when the world became too loud, too cruel. I started the engine, listening to the familiar rattle of the worn-out muffler. I looked at my son through the rearview mirror and made a silent vow. I would never let another human being make him feel small, not my father, not society, no one. The next 8 years were not a montage of weeping and self-pity. They were a masterclass in relentless survival. I completely severed ties with Calvin and his money. I took on 3 jobs. I hauled crates as an art handler during the day, waited tables at a diner off Peachtree Street at night, and took online courses in art history until 2 in the morning. Every extra dollar went toward Malik. When I had to choose between paying for my own winter coat or buying him professional-grade canvases and premium oils, I chose the oils every single time. My father thought I would fail. He thought the crushing weight of raising a child with special needs without his financial safety net would send me crawling back to his mansion begging for a handout. He underestimated my pride, and he entirely misjudged my competence. I leveraged my grunt work in the art handling business into a position as a gallery assistant. I studied the wealthy collectors who walked through the doors. I learned how they spoke, how they negotiated, and what drove their purchasing decisions. I realized quickly that the high-end art world was just as ruthless as my father's real estate empire. It was a game of perception, exclusivity, and power. I learned to play it flawlessly. By the time I turned 30, I had clawed my way up from fetching coffee to curating small pop-up exhibitions in warehouse spaces across West Midtown. My eye for raw talent and market trends caught the attention of major investors. Now at 33, I sit as the chief curator at one of the most prestigious contemporary galleries in downtown Atlanta. My rattling Honda Civic has been replaced by a sleek Audi. My clearance rack dresses have been traded for tailored designer suits. I built my kingdom brick by brick on my own terms. But my greatest achievement is not my career. It is my son. Malik is now 15 years old. The boy who used to hide behind my legs at family dinners has grown into a quiet, brilliant teenager. His mind works in ways that defy ordinary comprehension. His art evolved from chaotic childhood expressions into breathtakingly complex, geometric masterpieces that capture human emotion with devastating precision. He paints what he cannot say. When Malik turned 13, I knew his work belonged in galleries. But I also knew the dark side of this industry. If the art world discovered that these profound, complex pieces were painted by a Black autistic teenager, they would exploit his narrative. They would turn him into a charity case, a spectacle to be pitied and consumed by wealthy patrons looking to feel good about themselves. I refused to let my son be commodified. I refused to let the world view him through the same distorted lens my father had used. So I created a shield. I established an anonymous pseudonym for him using our combined initials, MZ. I began submitting his pieces to exclusive underground showcases and international buyers under the strictest confidentiality agreements. The mystery surrounding MZ became a firestorm. Collectors speculated endlessly about the identity of the genius behind the canvas. Was it a reclusive European master? An eccentric tech billionaire? The lack of a face or a backstory forced the elite to judge the art purely on its undeniable merit. MZ became a cult sensation in modern art circles, commanding astronomical prices in private sales. And Malik remained safe, entirely shielded from the predatory glare of the public eye, happily painting in the custom-built natural light studio of our penthouse. I sit at my custom glass desk in my downtown gallery reviewing a stack of international exhibition portfolios. The gallery is quiet before opening hours. The scent of fresh espresso and polished hardwood fills the air. I am untouchable here. My sleek smartphone buzzes sharply against the glass surface. The notification banner lights up the screen displaying an incoming email marked highly urgent. The sender is the executive director of Christie's auction house in New York. I tap the screen, opening the message. My eyes scan the text. Christie's is organizing their most exclusive winter contemporary gala. It is an invite-only event for global billionaires and elite collectors. They have been relentlessly pursuing an MZ piece for their catalog for over a year. I have always declined protecting the scarcity of Malik's work, but this email is different. They are not asking for a new commission. They are requesting a very specific piece from the verified MZ private catalog. They want the Genesis piece, the artwork that sparked the entire anonymous portfolio. They want to feature it as the absolute crown jewel of the winter auction, guaranteeing an unprecedented bidding war. They want Lot 42. I set my phone down. A slow, deliberate smile spreads across my face. I stand up from my desk, smoothing the fabric of my suit trousers, and walk down the private corridor of my gallery toward my climate-controlled high-security vault. I punch in the keypad code. The heavy steel door clicks and swings open. Inside, resting on a custom easel in the center of the vault, is the canvas. It is the exact same painting Malik handed to my father 8 years ago. The colors remain as vibrant and striking as the night they were painted. I step closer, reaching out to trace the heavy texture of the acrylics. I run my hand along the bottom back corner of the wooden frame. Right there, baked into the wood fibers, is a faint faded watermark, the permanent stain left behind by the ice water from my father's champagne bucket. Calvin threw this masterpiece away, calling it cheap garbage. He discarded it to protect his precious image in front of Atlanta's elite. Now the most prestigious auction house in the world is begging to place it on a pedestal for the global 1%. The irony is sharp and delicious. I walk back to my desk and pick up my phone. I hit reply to the director at Christie's. I type a single sentence confirming the submission of Lot 42 and granting them the rights to list it as the main event. I press send. The trap is officially set. My father thinks he holds all the power in this city with his failing real estate empire. He has no idea that the daughter he threw away holds the keys to the most coveted asset in the modern art world. The collision course is inevitable, and I am entirely ready for the impact. The heavy oak doors of Prime 112 open into a wall of sound and the overwhelming scent of dry-aged beef and expensive bourbon. It is the kind of establishment where Atlanta's elite come to be seen as much as to eat. I hand my coat to the hostess and scan the dimly lit dining room. I spot them immediately in a secluded leather corner booth. Calvin sits at the center holding a crystal glass of scotch, looking every bit the ruthless real estate mogul he pretends to be. But my eyes catch the subtle details. The slight tremor in his hand when he lifts the glass. The tightening around his jaw. He is wearing a custom Tom Ford suit, but the confidence he projects is paper thin. My contacts in the financial district confirmed it 3 days ago. His commercial properties in Midtown are sitting vacant, bleeding capital at an unsustainable rate. He is drowning in debt. I walk over with my head held high, my tailored silk blouse catching the ambient light. I slide into the booth across from my sister Kendra and her husband Trent. Kendra barely looks up from her phone. She is draped in a garish amount of designer jewelry clearly purchased on our father's dwindling credit lines. Trent sits next to her, aggressively swirling the ice in his glass, trying to project the image of a tech visionary. He is wearing a velvet blazer that screams trying too hard. Calvin does not offer a hug. He does not ask how my drive was. He signals the waiter immediately. We are ordering the tomahawk steaks. He barks at the server without consulting anyone else at the table. Bring the vintage Cabernet. The expensive one. He is overcompensating, throwing money around to mask the fact that his empire is crumbling. I lean back against the leather seat, resting my hands quietly on the table. You wanted to see me, Calvin, I say, keeping my voice perfectly level. I have a gallery opening to prepare for, so let us skip the pleasantries. Calvin narrows his eyes at my directness. He hates that I do not call him Dad anymore. He hates that he cannot control my schedule. We are family, Zara, he says smoothly, adjusting his gold cufflinks. Families should break bread together, especially when exciting things are happening. He gestures broadly toward Kendra. Your sister is stepping up to take a prominent seat on the board of my new commercial development initiative. I look at Kendra. She is busy checking her reflection in the blade of her butter knife. A prominent seat on a board requires actual work, I note internally, but outwardly I just raise an eyebrow. She has always had the natural leadership for it, Calvin continues, his voice swelling with practiced pride. That private school education really polished her executive presence. She understands the legacy of this family. He turns his gaze to me. His eyes are cold, calculating, and full of the same disdain he showed Malik 8 years ago. You could learn a thing or two from her, Zara. You always insisted on doing things the hard way, refusing my guidance. Working those 2 humiliating jobs at the diner and the library during college just to pay for a liberal arts degree. I told you then it was a waste of time. Look where it got you. The audacity of his revisionist history is staggering. He did not offer guidance. He offered financial manipulation. He told me he would only pay for my tuition if I studied corporate law and agreed to work under him for 10 years. When I refused and chose art history, he cut me off entirely. I worked myself to the bone to survive, while Kendra dropped out of 3 different degree programs on his dime. Yet here he sits, crowning her the heir to a failing kingdom. I take a slow sip of my sparkling water. I am doing exactly what I set out to do, Calvin, I reply. My career is quite fulfilling. Trent lets out a loud, obnoxious laugh. He leans across the table, invading my personal space. Fulfilling is a nice word for low-income Zara, he says, his lips curling into a condescending smirk. Let us be real here. You are just organizing pictures on walls. It is a cute hobby, but it is not real business. I shift my gaze to Trent. He is a man who has never built anything of value in his life. He married into my father's money and acts as if he earned it. Real business, I echo, tilting my head slightly. And what exactly constitutes real business, Trent? He puffs out his chest, adjusting his velvet lapels. Disruptive technology, Zara. Scalable revenue streams. I am launching a new tech startup. We are integrating blockchain with commercial real estate logistics. It is highly complex. You would not really understand the metrics. It requires a heavy capital injection, but the projected ROI is astronomical. He uses buzzwords like a shield, hoping the jargon will confuse me. He does not know that I curate art collections for actual tech billionaires. I hear pitches from real venture capitalists every single day. I can spot a hollow shell company from a mile away. Trent's startup is a fantasy designed to drain more of Calvin's money. It sounds incredibly ambitious, Trent. I say, my tone dripping with polite sarcasm. Blockchain logistics. Fascinating. Tell me, who is your lead developer? Trent blinks. The smug smile falters for a fraction of a second. We are in the procurement phase. He stammers slightly. We are securing the foundational capital before we bring on the technical labor. Translation. He has no product, no team, and no actual business plan. He just wants cash. I look back at Calvin. The pieces of the puzzle snap into place. Calvin's real estate firm is failing. He cannot secure traditional bank loans anymore because his credit is overextended on empty midtown properties. Trent wants to play tech CEO but has no investors. They are sitting across from me not to celebrate family, but because they are desperate. They think I am the same struggling single mother they discarded. They think I am vulnerable to their manipulation. Calvin leans forward, resting his elbows on the table. The waiter arrives, placing massive sizzling cuts of steak in front of us. Calvin waits until the server pours the expensive wine before he delivers his real agenda. The thing about real business, Zara, is that it requires family unity, Calvin says, his voice dropping an octave, taking on a serious, demanding tone. Trent's venture is going to elevate our entire portfolio. It is the future. But timing is critical. We need liquidity to push it past the seed phase. I cut a small piece of my steak. I do not eat it. I just look at him waiting for the inevitable demand. You own that historic home in Midtown now, Calvin states. It is not a question. He has been checking public property records. It has appreciated significantly since you bought it. I am transferring Trent's seed funding through the family trust, but there is a temporary freeze on liquid assets due to an international tax audit. He lies effortlessly. There is no international tax audit. His assets are frozen because his creditors are circling. I need you to pull a second mortgage on your house, Zara. It is a short-term loan, 6 months max. You hand the cash over to Trent's holding company. When the startup goes public, I will ensure you get a 5% return on your investment. It is the least you can do for the family after everything we have provided for you. I stop cutting my steak. I place my silver knife down on the pristine white plate. The sharp clink of the metal echoes loudly at our table. Kendra stops chewing, looking up at me with an entitled glare. Trent sits back, crossing his arms, expecting me to bow to Calvin's authority, just like everyone else in his life does. They are demanding I put a lien on the only home my son has ever known. The sanctuary I bought with my own blood, sweat, and tears. They want me to risk Malik's security to fund a fraudulent startup for a man who openly mocks my career. I look at Calvin. I look at Trent. I look at Kendra. I feel absolutely nothing for them. No loyalty, no fear, no obligation. The little girl who used to crave her father's approval died the moment he threw my son's painting in the trash. The woman sitting in this booth is a predator, and they have just walked willingly into my territory. The waiter steps away, taking the empty bread basket and leaving behind a silence thick with expectation. Calvin slices into his bone and ribeye with the aggressive precision of a man who believes he owns everything his knife touches. He does not even look at me as he chews, letting the weight of his previous statement hang in the heavy restaurant air. He expects me to flinch. He expects me to immediately start calculating how to appease him. That is how he trained us to react. I sit perfectly still. The ambient noise of clinking silverware and wealthy patrons laughing at adjacent tables fades into a dull hum. I look at the three of them sitting across from me. They resemble a poorly composed portrait of desperation disguised as luxury. My house in Midtown, I say. Finally, my voice calm and smooth. You want me to take out a second mortgage on a historic property I own outright. Calvin points his steak knife at me. It is a strategic reallocation of assets, Zara. The gentrification boom in your neighborhood has tripled your property value over the last 4 years. You are sitting on hundreds of thousands of dollars in dead equity. It is irresponsible to let it stagnate when Trent has a scalable venture ready to launch. We are a family. We pool our resources to build the dynasty. Trent leans forward, resting his forearms on the white tablecloth. He gives me a patronizing smile, the kind reserved for people he believes are intellectually inferior. Look at it as an opportunity, Zara. I am giving you the chance to get in on the ground floor. You leverage your house, and in return, I will write you in for a 2% equity stake in the company. When we secure our Series A funding from actual venture capitalists next quarter, you will make your money back threefold. You will not have to worry about selling paintings to tourists anymore. I watched Trent closely. A 2% stake in a company with no product, no developers, and no actual business plan. He wants me to hand him the roof over my son's head so he can play tech mogul and fund his luxury lifestyle, while Calvin desperately tries to hide his impending bankruptcy. I am not a bank, Trent, I reply, keeping my tone conversational. And I am certainly not an angel investor for a blockchain logistics firm that only exists in your imagination. Kendra slams her wine glass down onto the table. The dark red liquid sloshes over the rim, staining the pristine white linen like blood. You are so unbelievably selfish. She snaps, her voice rising just enough to draw a glance from the sommelier standing nearby. Dad is giving you a direct instruction to help the family, and you sit there acting like you are above us. You have a massive house with 4 bedrooms, and it is just you and that kid. You do not even need all that space. That kid has a name, Kendra, I say, my eyes locking onto hers. The temperature at our table plummets. Kendra rolls her eyes, waving her manicured hand dismissively. Whatever. The point is, you have been taking up space and draining this family for years. Do you have any idea how exhausting it was for us to deal with your emotional baggage? While I was building connections and networking for Dad's firm, you were constantly having a crisis. We had to tiptoe around you because you decided to raise a special needs child on your own. Do you know how embarrassing it was to explain Malik's little episodes to our friends? To explain why my sister could not afford a nanny, or why she was working at a diner instead of an internship? The sheer toxicity of her words sits between us. She is weaponizing my son's autism. She is using the hardest years of my life, the years they completely abandoned me to financial ruin, as leverage to guilt me into handing over my property. She genuinely believes that because my son is different, I owe them compensation for the perceived inconvenience of our existence. Dad carried your emotional weight for years. Kendra continues, leaning across the table, her eyes flashing with venom. He tolerated your rebellion. He tolerated your refusal to join his firm. He allowed you to keep the family name even when you were dragging it through the mud. You owe him, Zara. You owe all of us. Risking your house is the absolute least you can do to pay the toll for everything we have put up with. I look from Kendra to Calvin. I wait for my father to correct her. I wait for him to defend his grandson, to say that Malik is not a burden to demand respect for my child. But Calvin just continues chewing his steak. He takes a slow, deliberate sip of his Cabernet, wiping his mouth with a cloth napkin. He agrees with her. In his mind, Malik and I have always been a tax on his reputation. Calvin sets his glass down and reaches into the breast pocket of his tailored suit. He pulls out a folded legal document and tosses it onto the table. It lands right next to my sparkling water. Those are the authorization forms, Calvin says, his voice devoid of any warmth. My attorneys have already drafted the paperwork. All you need to do is sign. The bank will process the equity loan against your property by Friday. The funds will be routed directly into a holding account managed by Trent. I stare at the document. They brought actual legal paperwork to a dinner. They were so incredibly confident that they could bully me into submission that they bypassed a conversation and went straight to the execution. And if I decline, I ask softly. Calvin leans forward, resting his heavy hands on the table. The facade of the benevolent patriarch drops completely, revealing the desperate, cornered tyrant underneath. If you refuse to support your family when we call upon you, then you are no longer part of it, Calvin states, his voice dropping into a cold, deadly register. Let me be absolutely clear with you, Zara. I have spent decades building an empire. I decide who benefits from my legacy and who gets left in the dust. If you do not sign those papers by Monday morning, I will call my estate lawyers and you will be completely written out of my will. He pauses, letting the threat hang in the air, ensuring I understand the magnitude of his ultimatum. You will not receive a single dime, he continues. You will be stripped of your shares in the real estate trust. You will get none of the commercial properties, not a single liquid asset. You and that boy will be cut off permanently. You will have to survive on your own for the rest of your life, organizing your little pictures while Kendra and Trent inherit everything I have built. He sits back in his chair, crossing his arms, expecting fear to wash over my face. He expects me to scramble, to reach for the pen, to beg him not to take away my future financial security. He still believes his money is a god, and that I am a devout worshiper terrified of excommunication. He has no idea that his empire is already burning to the ground. He has no idea that his creditors are preparing to seize the very assets he is currently threatening to withhold from me. Trent smirks, swirling the ice in his empty glass. Come on, Zara, Trent says, his tone mocking and victorious. Be smart for once in your life. Do not throw away your entire future just because you are too stubborn to take a little risk. Sign the paper. We all know you cannot afford to lose your inheritance. Kendra crosses her arms, mirroring her husband's triumphant posture. Do not make Dad do this, Zara, she says, pretending to sound sympathetic. Just do your duty as the middle child. Make yourself useful for once. I look at the thick legal document sitting on the pristine tablecloth. I look at the massive, expensive cuts of meat they ordered without checking the prices. I look at the diamonds on my sister's neck and the arrogance on my brother-in-law's face. They are predators, circling what they believe is a wounded animal, completely unaware that they have walked directly into a trap of their own making. I feel my pulse steady. The rage that briefly flared in my chest when Kendra insulted my son cools into something sharp, calculating, and lethal. I am not the frightened 25-year-old girl they pushed out of a ballroom 8 years ago. I am a woman who builds empires in the shadows. I slowly reach out my hand and rest my fingertips on the edge of the legal document. I feel 3 pairs of eyes tracking my movement, waiting for my surrender. I take a slow, deep breath, tasting the expensive steakhouse air, preparing to show them exactly how little their threats mean to me. I keep my fingertips resting lightly on the thick parchment of the authorization forms. Calvin watches my hand like a hawk watching a field mouse, expecting me to surrender. Kendra holds her breath, anticipating the moment she gets to gloat. Trent maintains his insufferable smirk, absolutely certain that his position as the favored son-in-law grants him immunity from reality. Instead of picking up the silver pen laid out so conveniently beside my glass, I simply push the document back across the table. I slide it so deliberately that it bumps into Calvin's half-empty wine glass, causing a ripple of dark red liquid to splash against the rim. I am not signing anything I say. My voice is steady, carrying no anger, no sorrow, and absolutely no fear. Calvin's face darkens instantly. The veins in his neck bulge against his starched white collar. You do not have a choice, Zara, he growls, keeping his volume low but venomous. You will do as you are told, or you will face the consequences I just outlined. Before he can launch into another tirade about his legacy, the waiter reappears at our table. Sensing the suffocating tension, the young man awkwardly places a black leather bill presenter near the center of the table, right between Calvin and Trent. He mumbles a quick thank you and practically sprints away. I reach out and pull the leather folder toward me. I flip it open. $852, a ridiculous sum for an hour of being insulted and threatened. I pick up the folder and slide it smoothly across the pristine white tablecloth. It glides perfectly, stopping right in front of Trent. Trent looks down at the bill and then up at me, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. What is this, he asks. That is the bill for the dry-aged steaks and the vintage Cabernet you just consumed, I reply, folding my hands in my lap. Since your blockchain logistics firm is poised for such astronomical returns, covering an $800 dinner should not even register as a rounding error for a tech CEO of your caliber. Consider it a display of good faith to your potential investors. Trent lets out a sharp, nervous laugh, glancing quickly at Calvin. Very funny, Zara. Dad is hosting this dinner. I am not talking to Dad, I say, my gaze locked onto Trent. I am talking to the man who just spent 45 minutes explaining how real business works. Real businessmen do not expect single mothers to finance their imaginary startups. So pull out your wallet, Trent. Pay for your meal. Kendra slams her hand onto the table, causing the silverware to rattle. You are being completely ridiculous, Zara. She snaps, her voice shrill and echoing in the quiet dining room. Stop trying to embarrass my husband. Dad invited us here. He is paying. You are just trying to deflect because you know you are trapped. You have always been incredibly petty when things do not go your way. Calvin slams his fist down so hard the salt shaker tips over. Enough, he barks, his voice finally breaking the bounds of polite restaurant volume. I am done playing games with you, Zara. You sit here and disrespect me in front of my family. You mock your brother-in-law. You act as if you have some higher moral ground when you are nothing but a disappointment who got lucky in the real estate market. He leans over the table, his face mere inches from mine. "I gave you life," he hisses. "I gave you my name. And this is how you repay me, by humiliating us. I told you what happens if you refuse. I will call my lawyers tomorrow morning. I will wipe your name from the family trust. You will not see a single dime of my estate. You will be dead to me." The threat hangs in the air. This is his ultimate weapon, the same weapon he has used to keep Kendra compliant and Trent obedient. He truly believes his wealth is the leash that binds us all to his ego. I look him dead in the eye. I do not blink. I do not waver. "You cannot cut me out of an estate that no longer exists, Calvin." I state clearly, emphasizing every single syllable. Calvin freezes. The color drains from his face, leaving him looking suddenly hollow and old. Kendra frowns, looking between us in sudden confusion. Trent stops shifting in his seat. I lean forward, resting my arms on the table, invading his space, just as Trent had done to me earlier. "You think I just hang pictures on walls?" I say, my voice dropping to a surgical whisper. "I curate collections for people whose net worth makes your entire portfolio look like spare change. People talk, Calvin. Real investors talk. I know exactly why you are desperate for the equity in my home." I watch the panic begin to swim in his eyes, but I do not stop. I dismantle his facade piece by piece. "Your commercial properties in Midtown are 30% occupied." I continue rattling off the facts like a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. "Your flagship building on Peachtree has a commercial loan that is 90 days past due. You have been quietly trying to secure a merger with Sterling DuPont to save your firm, but he is ignoring your calls. You are not transferring money to Trent through a family trust because of an international tax audit. You cannot access your liquid assets because your creditors are preparing to freeze your accounts." Kendra turns to her father, her eyes wide with shock. "Dad," she asks, her voice trembling slightly, "what is she talking about? Is that true?" Calvin does not answer her. He just stares at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. The great patriarch utterly paralyzed by the truth. Trent swallows hard, running a hand through his hair. His eyes dart around the restaurant, suddenly looking like a trapped animal. He realizes the infinite bankroll he married into is an illusion. "This entire dinner was a setup," I say, shaking my head in disgust. "You did not want to fund a tech startup. Trent just wanted cash to maintain his luxury lifestyle, and you needed a quick injection of capital to stave off bankruptcy for another month. You were willing to leverage the roof over my disabled son's head. You were willing to risk Malik becoming homeless just to buy yourselves 30 more days of pretending you are still rich." I stand up, pushing my chair back. It scrapes loudly against the floor. I pick up my purse and adjust the collar of my jacket. "Keep your threats." "Calvin," I say, looking down at the broken man sitting in the booth, "I do not need your estate, and I certainly do not want your debt. Do not ever contact me again. Do not call my phone. Do not show up at my gallery. And if you or your parasitic son-in-law ever try to come near my property or my son, I will personally ensure your financial ruin becomes front-page news in the Atlanta Business Chronicle." I turn my back on them and begin walking toward the exit. The air in the restaurant feels suddenly lighter, as if a massive physical weight has been lifted from my shoulders. I walk past the bustling tables, the groups of executives laughing, the couples celebrating, holding my head high. Before I reach the heavy glass doors leading out to the valet stand, I hear a commotion behind me. I pause and glance over my shoulder. Trent is standing at the table, holding out a shiny platinum credit card to the waiter, trying to salvage some shred of his bruised ego in front of the surrounding tables. The waiter processes the card on a handheld terminal. A sharp negative beep cuts through the ambient noise. "I am sorry, sir," the waiter says loudly enough for the neighboring booths to hear. "This card has been declined. Do you have another form of payment?" Trent's face turns a brilliant shade of crimson. He starts arguing with the waiter, raising his voice about banking errors and fraudulent fraud protection triggers. Kendra is burying her face in her hands, completely mortified by the public spectacle. Calvin just sits there staring blankly at the untouched steak on his plate, the reality of his collapse finally crashing down on him. A slow, genuine smile spreads across my face. I turn around, push open the heavy glass doors, and step out into the cool Atlanta night air. The valet brings my car around. I slip into the driver's seat feeling a profound sense of peace. They thought they could break me tonight. Instead, they broke themselves. And knowing Kendra and Trent, they will not accept this humiliation quietly. They will try to retaliate. But I have built a fortress they cannot penetrate, and I am ready for whatever desperate move they attempt next. The morning sunlight filtered beautifully through the 20-foot floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown Atlanta gallery, casting sharp geometric shadows across the polished concrete floors. This space was my sanctuary. I had designed every inch of it, from the minimalist track lighting to the climate-controlled archives in the back. Unlike my father's crumbling real estate empire, my gallery was thriving entirely funded by my own sweat and strategy. 48 hours had passed since I walked out of that high-end steakhouse, leaving my family to choke on their own financial ruin. I was standing near the reception desk reviewing a final shipping manifest for a private collector in London when the heavy glass front doors swung open with aggressive force. The disruption was immediate. The quiet, sophisticated atmosphere of the gallery was shattered by the sharp, loud clicking of designer heels and a voice that carried entirely too much unearned authority. I looked up from my tablet. Kendra was strutting through the entrance wearing an oversized pair of dark sunglasses indoors and carrying a massive iced coffee. The condensation from her plastic cup was dripping directly onto my pristine floors. Trent followed closely behind her, dressed in another ridiculous velvet blazer, loudly barking orders into his cell phone and acting as if he owned the building. They had not called. They had not made an appointment. They simply barged into my professional domain, operating under the delusion that blood gave them a VIP pass to disrespect my boundaries. My gallery assistant, Julian, a sharp and dedicated young man who knew how to handle high-net-worth clients, immediately stepped out from behind the reception desk. He offered a polite, welcoming smile, attempting to intercept them before they tracked more water across the exhibition floor. "Good morning, welcome to the gallery," Julian said, maintaining his perfect professional tone. "If you are carrying beverages, I will have to ask that you leave them at the front desk to protect the artwork." Kendra stopped dead in her tracks. She lowered her sunglasses, staring at Julian as if he were an insect that had just spoken to her. She let out a scoff of pure offense. "Excuse me," she snapped, snapping her free hand in the air toward him. "Do you have any idea who I am? I am the owner's sister. I am not leaving my drink anywhere. In fact, you can go fetch me a napkin because this cup is sweating and it is ruining my manicure. Go on. Move." Julian blinked, taken aback by the sheer hostility of her demand. He looked toward me for guidance. I handed my tablet to him, giving him a reassuring nod. "Take a break, Julian," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the quiet gallery. "I will handle these two." I stepped out from behind the desk, smoothing the lines of my tailored charcoal suit. I walked slowly toward them, projecting an aura of complete control. This was my territory. Calvin was not here to protect them, and there were no steakhouse waiters for them to bully. "You are trespassing, Kendra," I stated, stopping a few feet away from her. "I explicitly told you at the restaurant never to come near my property." Kendra rolled her eyes, taking a loud, obnoxious sip from her iced coffee. "Oh, please, Zara, drop the dramatic boss lady act," she said, waving her hand dismissively at the multi-million-dollar collection surrounding us. "We are not here to look at these weird, abstract finger paintings. We are here on family business. Dad sent us." Trent finally lowered his phone, ending his call without saying goodbye to whoever was on the other end. He shoved the device into his pocket and looked around the gallery with a sneer of open disgust. He scoffed at a large-scale contemporary canvas hanging on the western wall. "Family business," Trent echoed, stepping forward to stand shoulder to shoulder with my sister. His white privilege and arrogant entitlement radiated from him in waves. "Though to be honest, Zara, I am surprised you can afford the rent in this district selling this pretentious garbage. Who actually buys a canvas with a red square on it? It is a scam. But that is exactly why we are here to help you out. We are willing to look past your little temper tantrum at the restaurant." I stared at him, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make him uncomfortable. "I did not have a temper tantrum, Trent." I replied, my tone perfectly measured. I exposed you as a fraud, and I refuse to fund your imaginary tech startup. There is a distinct difference. Now tell me what you want before I have security physically remove you both from my building." Kendra crossed her arms, her designer bag dangling from her elbow. "We want the VIP passes," she demanded, getting straight to the point. "The all-access front-row lanyards for the Christie's Winter Contemporary auction next weekend. We know you have them, Zara. You are practically in bed with the auction house directors." I tilted my head, evaluating their desperation. The Christie's Winter Auction was the most exclusive event of the season. Getting a front-row seat required either a billionaire's bank account or deep connections in the elite art world. My family possessed neither. "And why exactly do you think you need VIP passes to a fine art auction?" I asked, knowing the answer, but wanting to hear them say it. "Neither of you knows the difference between a Picasso and a preschool drawing." Trent stepped closer, puffing out his chest, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. "Because Sterling DuPont is going to be there," Trent stated confidently. "He is sitting in the VIP section. Dad found out through his country club contacts. Sterling has been dodging Dad's calls for a merger meeting for 3 years. We need to get in the same room with him. We need to sit next to him." The strategy was so incredibly transparent, it was almost pathetic. Calvin's real estate firm was bleeding cash. His creditors were closing in. His only hope for survival was a massive capital injection from Sterling DuPont, an elusive billionaire venture capitalist who famously avoided desperate businessmen. Calvin thought that if he could just get Kendra and Trent into the VIP section of the auction, they could corner Sterling, force a conversation, and pitch their fraudulent startup and real estate merger. They were trying to use my connections to save the very empire Calvin had threatened to cut me out of. "You expect me to hand over tens of thousands of dollars worth of elite access passes so you can ambush a billionaire who wants nothing to do with you?" I asked, a cold smile playing on my lips. "It is the least you can do." Zara Kendra shot back, her voice rising with defensive anger. "After you humiliated Dad at dinner, you owe us. You refuse to leverage your house, so this is your alternative. You give us the tickets and Dad might actually forgive you. He might even put you back in the will. Just hand them over and we will leave you to your little art shop." While Kendra was speaking, Trent began wandering away from her, walking deeper into the main exhibition space. He was completely ignoring the velvet ropes and the subtle floor markers designed to keep patrons at a safe distance from the artwork. He treated my gallery with the same blatant disrespect he showed me. I watched him out of the corner of my eye. Trent approached a stunning minimalist sculpture displayed near the front entrance. It was a solid column of rare black marble holding a delicate geometric form carved from white quartz. The piece was balanced with mathematical precision, creating an illusion of weightlessness. It was priced at $15,000, and it was completely irreplaceable. "Trent," I said sharply, my voice echoing off the concrete walls, "step away from the installation." Trent ignored me. He let out a loud, arrogant laugh, turning his back to the sculpture. "What, this block of stone?" he mocked, gesturing carelessly over his shoulder. "I am sure you picked this up at a hardware store, Zara. Stop acting like you are guarding the crown jewels. You just put fancy lighting on rocks and call it high art. It is a joke." "Do not touch it," I commanded, taking a step forward, my entire body tensing. Trent looked right at me, his eyes full of malicious defiance. He wanted to prove that he could do whatever he wanted in my space. He wanted to show me that my rules did not apply to him. "Watch me." Trent challenged, a smug smile stretching across his face. He took a step backward and deliberately leaned his entire body weight against the black marble pedestal. He crossed his arms at his chest, striking a casual, arrogant pose, assuming the heavy stone would easily support his frame. He had absolutely no understanding of how modern art installations were engineered. The pedestal was not bolted to the floor, it was perfectly counterbalanced to support the delicate quartz on top. I saw the exact moment the physics of the sculpture gave way. The heavy black marble base tilted backward under the sudden blunt force of Trent's body weight. Trent's smug smile instantly vanished, replaced by a look of sheer panic as he felt the solid ground shift beneath him. He scrambled, flailing his arms wildly, trying to catch his balance, but it was too late. The momentum was already pulling him down. The delicate white quartz sitting on top of the pedestal slid forward as the base tipped. The silence of the gallery was suddenly shattered by the sickening sound of heavy stone accelerating toward the polished concrete floor. The sickening crash echoed through the cavernous space of my gallery like a gunshot. The delicate white quartz hit the polished concrete and exploded into a brilliant cloud of razor-sharp shrapnel. A split second later, the heavy black marble pedestal slammed down beside it, sending a shockwave vibrating through the soles of my shoes. The noise was deafening, cutting through the serene quiet of my professional sanctuary. Trent stood frozen in the center of the destruction. His arms were still awkwardly raised from his pathetic attempt to catch his balance. The smug arrogance had been wiped completely from his face, leaving behind the pale, wide-eyed expression of a man who just realized he made a very expensive mistake. The fine white dust from the shattered quartz settled slowly in the air, catching the sunlight streaming through the massive windows. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then Kendra shattered the silence. She let out a high-pitched shriek that grated against my nerves and immediately turned her fury on my gallery assistant. "Are you completely incompetent?" she screamed, pointing a manicured finger right at Julian. What kind of amateur establishment leaves heavy stone blocks completely unsecured in the middle of a walkway? My husband could have been seriously injured. You people created a massive safety hazard. I will sue this entire gallery for gross negligence. I will have your job, young man, and I will see this place shut down. Trent quickly caught on to her strategy. He adjusted his velvet blazer, trying to regain his composure, and puffed out his chest, attempting to cover his profound embarrassment with unearned outrage. "Your sister is right, Zara," he barked, stepping away from the debris and kicking a piece of shattered quartz out of his way with his expensive leather shoe. "This is a lawsuit waiting to happen. You are lucky I have good reflexes, or I would be leaving here in an ambulance. You need to train your staff better before someone actually gets hurt in this pretentious death trap. You should be apologizing to me." I did not raise my voice. I did not match their frantic energy. I simply turned my head slightly and caught the eye of my head of security standing near the entrance. "Lock the doors, Marcus," I commanded. Marcus, a towering man who took his job incredibly seriously, stepped forward and turned the deadbolts on the heavy glass front doors. The loud metallic clicks echoed through the silent gallery, sealing us inside. Kendra whipped her head around her dark sunglasses slipping down her nose. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice trembling slightly under her false bravado. "Open those doors right now, Zara. You cannot keep us in here. That is illegal. You are holding us hostage." "I am securing a crime scene, Kendra," I stated calmly. I walked slowly toward them, my heels crunching over the fine white dust of the destroyed sculpture. I pulled my tablet from the sleek leather portfolio under my arm. "You see, Trent, you just destroyed a masterpiece titled Ephemeral Balance. It was carved by an emerging sculptor from Barcelona, and it was valued at exactly $15,000. It was a flawless piece of modern geometric expression, and you crushed it because you wanted to prove you were above my rules." Trent scoffed, crossing his arms, though I could see a bead of sweat forming at his temple. "I did not destroy anything," he lied, smoothly shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Your faulty equipment collapsed. I barely grazed the thing. It was basically falling over before I even got near it." I tapped the screen of my tablet, accessing the gallery's high-definition surveillance system. I selected the camera mounted directly above the reception desk, which offered a flawless, unobstructed view of the front exhibition floor. I turned the tablet around and held it up right in front of Trent's face. "Let us review the tape," I suggested, my tone completely devoid of emotion. The crystal-clear footage played in vivid color. It showed Julian politely warning them about the beverages. It showed me stepping out to address them, and then it zoomed in perfectly on Trent. The video captured him explicitly ignoring my verbal command to step away from the installation. It showed him turning his back, planting his feet, and intentionally throwing his entire body weight against the freestanding marble pedestal with a smug smile on his face. It documented the exact moment physics took over and the stone tumbled. The footage was undeniable. There was no faulty equipment. There was only reckless, arrogant vandalism caught from 3 different camera angles. Trent stared at the screen. He swallowed hard, the Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. Kendra peered over his shoulder and her mouth clamped shut. The bluster drained out of her instantly. She knew what this meant. She knew they had 0 leverage left. "Julian," I said without taking my eyes off Trent, "please bring me the damage invoice for the quartz installation." Julian stepped forward immediately, handing me a crisp white envelope containing the formal invoice and the artist's authentication paperwork. I slipped the invoice out and pressed it flat against Trent's chest, forcing him to take it. $15,000, Trent, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Payable immediately. You are not leaving this building until that balance is settled in full. Trent shoved the paper back toward me, attempting one last stand. I am not paying 15 grand for a pile of rocks, he snarled, his face turning a blotchy red. This is extortion. Open those doors or I am calling the police. I will tell them you are holding us against our will. I smiled, a cold, calculated smile that made him take a physical step backward. Please do, Trent, I challenged, gesturing toward his pocket. Call the Atlanta Police Department right now. Let them dispatch 2 uniformed officers to my gallery. I will happily hand them this high-definition video of you intentionally destroying private property. They will arrest you for felony vandalism. They will read you your rights, place you in handcuffs right here on the polished concrete, and drag you out to a patrol car. You will be booked, processed, and your mugshot will be plastered across the local news before dinner time. I took a step closer, backing him directly into the wall. And how do you think Sterling DuPont is going to react to that headline? I asked, watching the sheer terror finally register in his eyes. Do you really think a billionaire venture capitalist is going to sign a lucrative merger with a family whose supposed tech visionary is currently sitting in a county holding cell for throwing a temper tantrum in an art gallery? Calvin's entire real estate empire is hanging by a single thread, and if you make me call the police, that thread snaps today. You will be the reason Calvin loses everything. How do you think my father will handle that news, Trent? Trent looked at Kendra, begging her silently for a way out. Kendra looked away, chewing her bottom lip nervously. She knew I had them entirely backed into a corner. Calvin would absolutely destroy them if they ruined his chances with DuPont over a $15,000 mistake. Calvin's wrath was far more terrifying to them than paying this bill. Trent reached into his tailored velvet jacket with a shaking hand. He pulled out a heavy metal corporate credit card, one undoubtedly tied to Calvin's last remaining lines of credit. He practically shoved it at Julian, who was holding a mobile payment terminal. "Run it," Trent muttered, staring at the floor, entirely defeated. "Just run the card and let us out of here. Do not say another word." Not. Julian processed the payment with practiced efficiency. The machine beeped approval, printing out a long, detailed receipt. Julian handed the heavy metal card back along with the receipt, which Trent crumpled into his pocket without even looking at the staggering total. "Unlock the doors, Marcus," I instructed, stepping back and giving them space to leave. The heavy deadbolts clicked open. Trent grabbed Kendra by the elbow, practically dragging her toward the exit, desperately trying to escape the profound humiliation he had just endured. They had walked into my sanctuary, expecting to bully me into submission, and they were leaving $15,000 poorer, with their dignity completely shattered. They were silent, entirely stripped of the arrogant entitlement they had carried in with them. "Wait!" I called out just as Trent reached for the heavy glass door handle. They both froze, turning around slowly like scolded children. I reached into my suit pocket and pulled out a thick black envelope stamped with the silver-embossed crest of Christie's auction house. I walked over my heels, clicking sharply against the floor, and held it out to Kendra. "What is this?" she asked, eyeing the envelope suspiciously as if it might contain poison. "It is what you came here for," I replied, maintaining my perfectly composed posture. 2 front-row VIP all-access passes to the Winter Contemporary Gala. You will be seated in the premiere section right across the center aisle from Sterling DuPont. It is exactly where Calvin wants you to be. It is the best positioning in the entire venue. Kendra snatched the expensive envelope from my hand, her confusion evident. "After everything that just happened, you are just giving these to us?" she asked, narrowing her eyes, trying to find the catch. You just made us pay $15,000, and now you are handing over tickets that are impossible to get. Why? Because I want you to be there, Kendra, I said, offering her a polite and entirely lethal smile. I want you and Trent and Calvin to have the best seats in the entire house. I want you to see exactly how real business operates in my world. I want you to witness history being made from the front row. Enjoy the auction. I turned my back on them and walked toward my private office, listening to the heavy glass doors swing shut behind them. They thought they had won a small victory. They thought they had salvaged their mission to secure the tickets and save face with Calvin. They had absolutely no idea that I had just handed them front row seats to their own financial and social execution. The trap was perfectly set, and they had walked right into it, eagerly clutching the bait. The drive back to my penthouse in Buckhead feels entirely different than the drive home 8 years ago. Back then, my hands shook violently on the steering wheel of a dying Honda Civic, my mind racing with absolute panic about how I would feed my child the next morning. Tonight, my grip on the leather steering wheel of my Audi is perfectly relaxed. I glide through the quiet Atlanta streets, watching the city lights reflect off the polished hood. Trent and Kendra walked out of my gallery today, clutching those VIP auction passes like they had just won the lottery. They genuinely believe they bullied me into submission. They think those front row tickets are their golden key to ambushing Sterling DuPont and saving Calvin from his imminent bankruptcy. They have no idea those tickets are actually their execution orders. I step out of my private elevator directly into the expansive foyer of my home. The space is completely silent, save for the soft hum of the climate control system filtering the air. I walk down the long hallway past my son's bedroom. The door is cracked open just enough to let a sliver of warm, ambient light spill across the hardwood floor. Malik is sound asleep. He is safe, entirely insulated from the greedy, desperate hands of my family. I leave my suit jacket draped over the back of a dining chair and walk straight toward my private studio at the far end of the penthouse. My studio is a massive open space filled with natural light during the day, but right now it is bathed in the cool, clinical glow of recessed lighting. The air here is meticulously monitored, preserving the exact humidity and temperature required for high-value artwork. At the far end of the room sits a heavy brushed steel vault built directly into the reinforced wall. I step up to the terminal punch in the 12-digit alphanumeric code and press my right thumb against the biometric scanner. The heavy steel door glides open with a soft pneumatic hiss, revealing the sterile interior. Inside, resting on a custom-built display rack, is the very first piece of the MZ collection. I reach in and lift the canvas carefully. The heavy, layered texture of the acrylics feels familiar against my fingertips. I carry it over to the large drafting table in the center of the room and set it face down under the bright inspection lights. Right there in the bottom right corner of the raw wood frame is a faint faded ring. The champagne stain, the physical scar of my father's arrogance. I run my index finger over the discolored wood. Calvin had no idea that when he threw this canvas into his trash bucket, he initiated a legally binding transfer of ownership. He threw away property. He discarded it in front of 50 witnesses at a catered event, loudly declaring he had no space for it in his home. Under property abandonment laws, discarded items belong to whoever reclaims them. I reclaimed it. I pulled it out of the ice and walked away. I walk over to my secure filing cabinet and pull out a thick black binder, setting it on the drafting table next to the canvas. I flip open the heavy cover, laying the documents out under the bright light. Here is the certificate of authenticity, signed and dated 8 years ago by an independent appraiser. Here is the unbroken chain of custody documenting the transfer of ownership from the artist directly to my LLC. Here is the federal trademark registration for the pseudonym MZ, securing all commercial rights entirely under my corporate umbrella. And here is the official copyright filing establishing absolute legal ownership of this specific physical work and its intellectual property. Calvin loves to use his corporate attorneys to bully vulnerable people into submission. He relies heavily on intimidation because he rarely possesses actual leverage. He thinks money buys reality. But I learned his game, and I spent the last 8 years building a fortress of legal documentation that not even his most expensive, high-powered lawyers can breach. The paper trail is completely airtight. This painting belongs to me. When I officially submit this canvas to the auction house, I will be submitting it under its registered title, a title Malik chose himself when he turned 12 years old and finally possessed the communication skills to understand exactly what had happened that night in the ballroom. He looked at the champagne stain on the back of the wood and he named the piece. He called it trash. It was a beautiful, defiant reclamation of the exact word Calvin used to diminish him. Tomorrow night, the global elite will bid millions of dollars for a canvas named Trash, and Calvin will sit in the front row completely unaware of the poetic justice hanging right in front of his face. I carefully wrap the canvas in acid-free archival tissue paper, making sure the heavily textured surface is completely protected from any friction. I slide the wrapped piece into a custom-built wooden shipping crate lined with high-density shock-absorbing foam. I press the lid down, secure the heavy metal latches, and seal the edges with bright red tamper-evident security tape. Every single movement I make is precise and deliberate. I am not just packing a piece of art. I am loading a weapon. I am packaging the very instrument of my father's public destruction. I slide the heavy black legal binder into a waterproof document sleeve and attach it securely to the exterior of the wooden crate. I check my watch. It is just past midnight. Christie's does not operate on standard business hours when dealing with highly coveted anonymous works of art. The logistics of transferring multi-million-dollar pieces requires absolute discretion. I carry the heavy crate down to the private parking garage, load it carefully into the trunk of my car, and drive through the empty streets toward a highly secure logistics facility located just outside the city center. The building looks like an ordinary concrete warehouse from the outside, but the interior operates like a bank vault. A meticulous man named Pierce, the lead authenticator for the Winter Contemporary Gala, is waiting for me in a sterile, brightly lit inspection room. Pierce wears pristine white cotton gloves and looks at the wooden crate with barely contained reverence. I place the crate on the metal inspection table. Pierce breaks the security tape and unseals the latches with practiced care. He lifts the canvas, setting it gently under the high-powered magnification lights. He spends several minutes checking the distinct brushstrokes against the authenticated MZ portfolio. He checks the chemical composition of the acrylics and the aging of the canvas. Finally, he flips the piece over and matches the faint champagne watermark on the frame to the highly specific description I provided in the provenance files. He nods slowly, his eyes wide with professional awe. "It is completely flawless," Pierce says, his voice hushed in the quiet room. "The Genesis piece. The board of directors will be absolutely thrilled to have this. We anticipate breaking auction records tomorrow night." I hand him the waterproof sleeve containing the legal binder. "Make sure this piece is listed as the final lot of the evening," I instruct him, keeping my tone authoritative. "And make sure the seating chart in the main ballroom matches the exact specifications I sent over this morning." Pierce smiles, securing the documents into his own locked briefcase. "Consider it done, Zara," he replies. I turn around and walk back out to my car. The night air is cold against my face, but my blood runs hot with pure anticipation. The bait is officially in the water and Calvin is swimming right toward it. The crystal chandeliers of the St. Regis Grand Ballroom cast a brilliant, blinding light across the polished marble floors. It is Saturday night and the air is thick with the scent of white orchids and vintage champagne. This is not just a social event. It is a battlefield for the global elite. International collectors, hedge fund managers, and real estate tycoons from London to Dubai have descended upon Atlanta for the Christie U.S. Winter Contemporary Auction. Millions of dollars will change hands tonight over pieces of stretched canvas and carved stone. I stand on the elevated mezzanine level, looking down at the rapidly filling room. I am wearing a custom emerald green silk floor-length gown that drapes flawlessly against my dark skin. My hair is pulled back into a sleek low bun, and my only jewelry is a pair of understated diamond stud earrings. I do not need loud accessories. Real power does not need to shout, it simply exists. Down below, the heavy mahogany double doors swing open, and a flurry of camera flashes erupts from the designated press pool. Calvin walks through the entrance, soaking up the flashbulbs like a dying man gasping for oxygen. He is wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo, but his posture is rigid. He is projecting the image of a wealthy patriarch, but I can spot the desperation radiating from him. He needs this night to validate his crumbling empire. Kendra is walking right beside him, clinging to his arm. She is draped in an aggressively sparkly silver gown and a diamond necklace that I recognize immediately from a high-end rental boutique in Buckhead. She tilts her chin up, attempting to look down her nose at the other guests, completely unaware that she is surrounded by people whose net worth makes our father look like a middle-class amateur. Trent follows a half-step behind them, trying desperately to look like a disruptive tech billionaire. He is wearing a dark suit with no tie and expensive sneakers. A calculated wardrobe choice meant to signal that he is too innovative for traditional formal wear. They bypass the crowded general admission line and approach the usher at the VIP entrance. Trent pulls out the thick black envelope I handed them yesterday at the gallery. He flashes the tickets with an arrogant flick of his wrist. The usher checks the serial numbers, nods respectfully, and unhooks the velvet rope. I watch like a hawk as the usher escorts my family straight down the center aisle of the ballroom. They walk past rows of European aristocrats and Silicon Valley heavyweights. They march all the way to the very front, dead center, the absolute best seats in the house. I personally mapped out the seating chart this morning. I placed them directly in the firing line of the main stage and perfectly opposite the private viewing box where Sterling DuPont will be sitting. They are sitting in the exact center of my trap. Kendra immediately pulls out her phone, snapping selfies from the front row, making sure the Christy Us logo on the stage is perfectly visible in the background. Trent leans back, crossing his legs, trying to look bored by the luxury surrounding him, while his eyes dart around the room, frantically searching for Sterling DuPont. Calvin nods to a few passing businessmen, pretending he belongs in this upper echelon. I take a deep breath, smooth the silk of my gown, and descend the curved staircase to the main floor. It is time to make my presence known. I walk gracefully through the crowd, a glass of sparkling water in my hand. I am immediately intercepted by the director of the High Museum of Art and a prominent private collector from Geneva. We stand in the wide aisle, exchanging warm greetings and discussing the phenomenal rise of anonymous artists in the modern market. I speak with authority, sharing insights on market valuation and curation strategy. The museum director hangs on my every word, treating me as an equal and industry expert who commands respect. Out of the corner of my eye, I see Calvin notice me. His jaw practically unhinges. He nudges Trent sharply in the ribs and points discreetly in my direction. They stare at me, standing there in my emerald gown, holding court with men who could buy and sell Calvin firm before breakfast. But Calvin is blinded by decades of his own patriarchal arrogance. He cannot fathom that the daughter he threw away, the daughter he deemed a failure, could possibly be attending this event as a powerful peer. His brain refuses to process the reality right in front of him. He searches for an explanation that fits his toxic narrative, and he quickly finds one. He assumes I am working. I excuse myself from the museum director and intentionally walk closer to the front row. As I pass by their seats, Calvin snaps his fingers at me twice, a sharp, disrespectful sound used to summon a dog or a waiter. "Zara," he calls out, his voice loud enough to turn the heads of the people sitting nearby. "Come here." I stop and turn toward them, my expression perfectly neutral. I step up to the edge of the front row, looking down at the three of them. "I did not expect to see you here," Calvin says, a nasty smirk twisting his features. He looks me up and down, taking in my gown, but completely missing the elegance of it. "I suppose it makes sense, though. You had to pick up an extra shift working the floor tonight to cover the cost of that broken rock your gallery tried to extort from Trent." Trent chuckles, leaning forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "They have you working event coordination tonight, Zara," Trent asks, his tone dripping with condescension. "That is a nice uniform. Very convincing. While you are fetching things, be a doll and go find a waiter for us. My glass has been empty for 5 minutes, and I need a fresh scotch before the bidding starts." Kendra lets out a short, breathy laugh, adjusting her rented diamond necklace. "Do not be too hard on her, Trent," she mocks. "Somebody has to stand in the back and make sure the rich people are comfortable. Just try not to drop anyone's drinks tonight, Zara. We are trying to conduct actual business here, Dad is waiting for a very important introduction, and we do not need you hovering around causing a distraction. The sheer level of their delusion is almost cinematic. They are sitting in seats I paid for, attending an event I facilitated, about to bid on artwork my son created, and they genuinely believe they are the ones holding the power. 8 years ago, their cruel words would have shattered my confidence. I would have shrunk into myself, internalized their insults, and walked away feeling like I was nothing but a burden. But today I just smile. It is a slow, terrifyingly calm smile. "I am not fetching your drinks, Trent," I reply, my voice smooth and projecting clearly. "And I am not working event coordination. I am simply making sure the guests in my designated VIP section are comfortable before the main event begins." Calvin scoffs, crossing his arms over his chest. "Your designated section? Please, you do not have the authority to assign seats in a cafeteria, let alone at a Christie U.S. auction. Stop playing games, Zara, and go do your job. We have serious capital to secure tonight." I take one step closer, leaning down slightly so my voice is meant only for them. "You should pay very close attention to the auction block tonight, Calvin," I whisper coldly. "You might learn a valuable lesson about recognizing worth. The rules here are incredibly strict. I highly advise you to keep your bidding paddles resting firmly on the floor unless you have a few $1 million of actual liquid cash to burn. Empty gestures will not save you here." Trent rolls his eyes, entirely dismissing my warning. "We are not here to buy paintings, Zara," he retorts. "We are here to finalize a merger with Sterling DuPont. Once he arrives and sees us sitting in the premiere section, he will know we are serious players. You just stand in the back and take notes on how real wealth operates." I straighten my posture, looking down at them one last time. "I will be sure to watch very closely," I say. "Enjoy the show." I turn my back on them, walking gracefully up the side aisle toward the shadows of the exclusive viewing wing. The grand crystal chandeliers suddenly dim, signaling the start of the event. A hush falls over the massive ballroom as the attendees take their seats and focus their attention forward. The head auctioneer, a distinguished British man in a sharp tuxedo, steps up to the polished wooden podium. He adjusts the microphone, tapping his gavel once against the sounding block. The sharp crack echoes through the room, sealing the atmosphere with absolute tension. I stand in the dark, completely out of sight, watching my father sit proudly in the front row. He is waiting for a billionaire savior to walk through the doors. He has absolutely no idea that his ultimate destruction is already waiting behind the velvet curtain on the stage. The sharp crack of the gavel echoes through the grand ballroom, commanding absolute silence from the wealthiest individuals in the city. I stand perfectly still in the shadowed viewing wing, watching the stage with an elevated heart rate. The auctioneer, a tall man with a crisp British accent and a commanding presence, steps away from the podium for a brief moment. The stagehands quickly clear the previous lot, a massive contemporary sculpture that just sold for a respectable sum. But the energy in the room shifts instantly. Every billionaire, venture capitalist, and museum director sitting in the velvet chairs knows exactly what is coming next. The catalogs resting on their laps have a blank black page for the final lot, building the mystique that has come to define my son. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer begins, his voice rolling over the high-quality sound system. "We have arrived at the apex of our winter gala. Throughout the evening, we have seen magnificent works from established masters and rising stars. But our final offering belongs in a category entirely its own." A low murmur ripples through the crowd. In the front row, I see Calvin lean forward slightly. He adjusts his posture, gripping his crystal glass of scotch, trying to project the image of a seasoned art collector. Trent mirrors him, crossing one ankle over his knee, while Kendra casually checks her reflection in her phone screen, completely oblivious to the cultural magnitude of the moment. They are just waiting for the auction to end, so they can hunt down Sterling DuPont. They have no idea the hunt is already over. For the past 3 years, the modern art world has been captivated by a singular, anonymous force. The auctioneer continues pacing slowly across the stage. A creator known to us only as MZ. This artist has redefined contemporary emotional expression. Their works are housed in the most exclusive private collections across the globe, closely guarded and fiercely coveted. The artist refuses all interviews, declines all public exhibitions, and allows the work to speak entirely for itself. We are profoundly honored tonight to present not just a piece by MZ, but the very foundation of the collection. Two stagehands wearing pristine white gloves roll a large, heavy easel onto the center of the stage. A thick black velvet drape covers the canvas, hiding it completely from the hungry eyes of the audience. The spotlight shifts, cutting through the dim ballroom and illuminating the draped easel. What we have under this curtain is the Genesis piece. The auctioneer announces his tone, dropping into a reverent hush. This is the origin. The exact canvas that birthed the legend of MZ. It has never been seen by the public. It has never been displayed in a gallery. It has been held in a highly secure private trust since its creation. The raw, unbridled brilliance of this early work showcases a mind processing the world with a depth and complexity that continues to baffle art historians. I watch Kendra lower her phone. The sheer theatricality of the presentation has finally caught her attention. Trent uncrosses his legs, sitting up straighter. Even Calvin seems captivated by the sheer financial weight the auctioneer is placing on this hidden object. They worship exclusivity, and right now they are staring at the most exclusive item in the room. The title of the piece was chosen by the artist to reflect the profound irony of subjective value, the auctioneer says, stepping back toward his wooden podium. Ladies and gentlemen, Christie is proud to present Lot 42, titled Trash. At his command, the stagehands grip the top corners of the black velvet drape. They pull it away in one swift, synchronized motion. The heavy fabric falls to the floor, and the custom gallery lighting hits the canvas. The ballroom collectively holds its breath. Malik paints with a visual frequency that borders on magic. The canvas explodes with deep abyssal blues and striking aggressive golds. The geometric shapes overlap and collide, creating a chaotic yet perfectly structured labyrinth of color and texture. It is a visual representation of an autistic child desperately trying to map out a noisy, unpredictable world. It is breathtaking, it is undeniably brilliant, and it is exactly the same painting that sat in Calvin's hand 8 years ago. From my vantage point in the shadows, I have a perfect, unobstructed view of the front row. I watch the realization hit them in real time like a slow-motion train wreck. Kendra is sitting closest to the center aisle. She squints at the stage, her brow furrowing in confusion. Her eyes track the chaotic blue and gold patterns. I can practically see the memory clawing its way up from the depths of her shallow mind. She remembers a crowded ballroom. She remembers a small boy in a cheap suit. She remembers laughing behind her wine glass and calling the artwork an embarrassment. Her mouth falls open in a silent gasp. All the color drains from her perfectly contoured face. She reaches out with a shaking hand and grabs Trent's velvet sleeve, her manicured nails digging violently into his arm. Trent flinches, swatting her hand away, but Kendra points a trembling finger at the stage. Trent follows her gaze. He stares at the canvas. He squints, trying to process why his wife looks like she just saw a ghost. Then his arrogant smirk slowly dissolves. He remembers telling my son to stick to coloring books. He remembers mocking special needs arts and crafts. He stares at the masterpiece bathed in the spotlight, the very same piece he told me to hide from real investors. He looks like all the oxygen has been sucked out of his lungs. But Calvin's reaction is the one I have waited 8 long years to witness. Calvin has his crystal glass raised halfway to his mouth, ready to take a confident sip of expensive scotch. The moment the canvas is unveiled, his hand freezes in midair. He sits there completely paralyzed. His eyes lock onto the heavy texture of the acrylics. He traces the chaotic golden swirls. He remembers the brown paper packaging. He remembers ripping it open with rough, impatient hands. He remembers the exact weight of the raw wood frame. His eyes slowly drift down to the bottom right corner of the canvas. Even from the front row, under the brilliant glare of the stage lights, the faint circular discoloration on the wood frame is visible. The permanent scar left by the ice water in his champagne bucket. Calvin's mouth drops open. The glass in his hand tilts dangerously, the amber liquid sloshing against the rim, but he does not notice. His chest heaves as his breathing turns shallow and rapid. The ruthless, unshakable patriarch of Atlanta real estate is suddenly reduced to a terrified, confused old man. He is staring directly at the physical manifestation of his own cruelty. He threw this painting into the garbage. He discarded it to protect his precious public image. And now the most powerful people in the world are sitting in absolute awe of it. The silence in the ballroom is broken by the sharp, authoritative voice of the auctioneer. We have significant registered interest from our international phone banks for this historic piece, the auctioneer declares, resting his hands on the edges of his podium. But we will open the bidding to the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, for lot 42, titled Trash, we open the bidding at $500,000. The number drops like a bomb over the front row. Calvin whole body jerks, as if he has been physically struck. $500,000. $500,000 as an opening bid. His failing company is currently fighting off creditors for amounts smaller than that. He spent the last 2 weeks begging me to leverage my home just to secure a fraction of that money for Trent fraudulent startup. He sat in a high-end steakhouse and threatened to cut me out of his will, completely unaware that I walked out of his mansion 8 years ago carrying an asset that would one day dwarf his entire liquid net worth. Trent lets out a ragged, breathless sound, running both hands over his face in sheer disbelief. Kendra looks like she might actually vomit right there in the front row. They are trapped in their seats, surrounded by billionaires, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to escape the crushing weight of their own monumental stupidity. I stand in the shadows, my emerald silk gown brushing softly against the balcony railing. A cold, calculated satisfaction settles deep into my bones. The trap has not just sprung, it has completely shattered their reality. I watch my father stare at the $500,000 opening bid on the board, his greedy mind scrambling to comprehend how he literally threw a fortune into the trash. The bidding has only just begun, and I know exactly how high it is going to go. $600,000 comes from a paddle in the third row. The crisp voice of the auctioneer slices through the heavy air of the grand ballroom, acknowledging the bid instantly. The tension in the room pulls taut like a piano wire. I remain perfectly still in the shadowed viewing wing, watching the floor below. $700,000 from the phone bank on my left, the auctioneer announces, pivoting his stance. Do I hear 8? $800,000 to the gentleman in the aisle. Down in the front row, Calvin is completely rigid. His hands are gripping his knees so tightly his knuckles are white. The crystal glass of expensive scotch sits abandoned on the floor next to his polished leather shoes. He is watching the numbers climb with a horrified fascination. His breathing is shallow and erratic. He is a man watching a life raft float past him while he drowns in an ocean of his own debt. $900,000 from the representative in the back. The auctioneer calls out, raising a polished hand. $1 million. We have $1 million on the phones from London. Kendra physically recoils in her seat. Her hand flies to her chest, clutching the rented diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. $1 million. That is more than the entire liquid value of Calvin real estate portfolio right now. She turns her head slowly, looking at Trent. Her eyes are wide with shock and a creeping, desperate realization. Trent looks physically ill. His velvet blazer suddenly seems incredibly cheap. He spent dinner yesterday bragging about a non-existent tech startup and mocking my career. He threw a $15,000 sculpture to the floor, trying to prove his dominance. Now he is sitting in a chair I provided, listening to international billionaires fight over a canvas painted by the disabled child he told me to keep away from real investors. The bidding does not stop at $1 million. It accelerates. The sheer frenzy surrounding the anonymous artist known as MZ has whipped the room into a feeding frenzy. These collectors do not just want a painting, they want the Genesis piece. They want the origin story of the modern art world's greatest mystery. $1.2 million to the paddle in the front, the auctioneer dictates his rhythm, relentless and driving. 1.5 on the phones, 1.8 from Dubai. I step slightly closer to the velvet-draped railing of the mezzanine. My emerald silk gown brushes silently against the floor. I look at the canvas resting under the brilliant stage lights. The deep abyssal blues and striking aggressive golds seem to pulse with life. Malik painted that when he was 7 years old. He painted it on the floor of our cramped apartment while I worried about how I was going to pay the electricity bill. He poured his frustration, his beautiful, complex mind, and his innocent love for his grandfather into every single brushstroke, and his grandfather threw it into a trash can. $2 million, the auctioneer declares, a note of genuine excitement bleeding into his professional composure. We are at $2 million for lot 42. Do I hear 2.2? Calvin chest heaves. He reaches up with a shaking hand and loosens his custom silk tie. He is sweating. The heat of the ballroom and the crushing weight of his own arrogance are finally suffocating him. He needs exactly $2 million to stop the bank from foreclosing on his flagship property in Midtown. He spent 45 minutes at a steakhouse threatening to disown me, demanding I leverage my historic home to save him. He told me I was a failure who took up too much space. Now the exact sum of his salvation is sitting right in front of his face, locked inside a raw wood frame that still bears the water stain from his champagne bucket. 2.5 million to the paddle on the right, the auctioneer calls out. 2.8 on the phones. Trent leans forward, resting his elbows heavily on his knees and burying his face in his hands. The arrogant tech visionary persona has completely evaporated. He is doing the math. He is realizing that the woman he tried to humiliate, the woman he thought he could bully into funding his luxury lifestyle, is currently holding an asset worth more than his entire bloodline. He is realizing that when I told them I curate collections for people whose net worth makes their portfolio look like spare change, I was not being dramatic. I was stating a financial fact. $3 million, the auctioneer projects, his voice ringing out clear and sharp. We have $3 million on the phones. A collective gasp ripples through the ballroom. Several paddles drop. The casual millionaires are officially priced out of the war. Only the absolute titans of industry remain in the fight. The room thins down to a silent, high-stakes duel between a hedge fund manager in the fourth row and a highly discreet phone bidder coordinating from one of the private gallery suites above. Kendra leans over and grabs Calvin by the arm, shaking him frantically. She is whispering fiercely into his ear, pointing at the stage. I know exactly what she is saying. She is telling him that the painting is his. She is calculating how many designer bags and luxury vacations $3 million can buy. Her superficial mind is already constructing a false reality where Calvin reclaims the painting and showers her with the profits. She does not understand copyright law. She does not understand property abandonment. She only understands greed. 3.2 million to the gentleman in the fourth row, the auctioneer states, leaning forward over the podium. Calvin's eyes are glued to the canvas. The deep geometric swirls are mocking him. The painting is a mirror reflecting the absolute worst mistake of his entire life. He gave away a fortune because it did not come wrapped in the corporate packaging he demanded. He threw away a masterpiece because it was handed to him by a child who flapped his hands and avoided eye contact. His bigotry and his obsession with public image cost him everything. 3.5 million on the phones, the auctioneer counters immediately. The hedge fund manager in the fourth row hesitates. He lowers his paddle slightly, conferring with an advisor sitting next to him. The heavy silence in the ballroom is deafening. Nobody dares to cough or shift in their seats. The tension is a physical weight pressing down on the crowd. We are at 3.5 million, the auctioneer prompts, raising his wooden gavel into the air. Do I hear 3.8? The hedge fund manager shakes his head, cutting his finger across his throat in a sharp gesture. He is out. The crowd murmurs, a low wave of whispered conversations breaking the silence. Calvin sits up straight, his eyes wide, his hands gripping the armrests of his velvet chair. He thinks the bidding is over. He thinks he knows the final value of the asset he is about to try and steal back from me. But I know the buyer on the other end of that phone line. I know exactly who is orchestrating this purchase from the private suite. He is not done. The auctioneer looks toward the phone bank coordinator standing on the side of the stage. The coordinator presses a hand to his earpiece, listening intently to the instructions coming from the private suite. He looks up at the auctioneer and gives a firm, decisive nod, holding up 4 fingers. Ladies and gentlemen, the auctioneer announces, his voice booming with undeniable triumph. The phone bidder has bypassed the increment. We have a bid of $4 million. The ballroom erupts into a shocked electric hum. $4 million. Calvin practically stops breathing. His face turns an ashen gray. Trent drops his hands from his face, staring at the stage with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. Kendra sits frozen, her mouth hanging open, completely unable to process the number. $4 million is not just wealth to them, it is godhood. It is the absolute pinnacle of their hollow materialistic aspirations. $4 million going once. The auctioneer calls out, his eyes scanning the completely silent room. Nobody moves, nobody breathes. The number is astronomical, an absolute record for an early work from an anonymous contemporary artist. $4 million going twice. The auctioneer continues, his grip tightening on the handle of his wooden gavel. He looks across the sea of stunned, wealthy faces. He looks down at my father, sitting in the front row, completely destroyed by his own past actions. Fair warning, the auctioneer states, raising the gavel high into the air. I take a deep breath, smoothing the emerald silk of my gown. The moment has arrived. The trap has fully locked around their ankles. The auctioneer brings the gavel down hard against the wooden-sounding block. The sharp crack reverberates through the entire ballroom like a gunshot. Sold for $4 million to the phone bidder in the gallery suite, the auctioneer shouts, pointing his gavel toward the upper levels. The entire ballroom explodes. The applause is deafening, a thunderous, roaring, standing ovation from the international elite. Billionaires rise to their feet, clapping enthusiastically for the historic sale of the MZ Genesis piece. The sheer energy in the room is intoxicating. But down in the front row, nobody is clapping. Calvin, Trent, and Kendra remain firmly in their seats. They look like they have just been sentenced to execution. Calvin is staring at the canvas, his chest heaving violently. His greedy, desperate mind is already shifting gears. The shock is wearing off, and the dark, toxic entitlement that has defined his entire life is clawing its way back to the surface. He thinks he can bully me. He thinks he can walk up to that stage and claim the $4 million simply because he shares my bloodline. He is about to learn that the daughter he threw away does not play by his rules anymore. I turn my back on the viewing wing and walk toward the private staircase leading down to the main floor. It is time to finish this. The descent down the private spiral staircase feels entirely too slow for the adrenaline rushing through my veins. The heavy applause from the ballroom floor is just beginning to settle, shifting into an excited electric murmur as the international elite process the historic $4 million sale. I push through the heavy velvet curtains, stepping into the darkened wings of the grand stage. The auctioneer is standing at the podium, wiping his brow with a white linen handkerchief, grinning at the monumental success of the night. Before I can step fully into the light, the sharp, violent scrape of a heavy chair being pushed back echoes from the front row. Calvin has snapped out of his paralyzed shock. The terror of his impending bankruptcy has been entirely eclipsed by a ravenous, blinding greed. I watch from the shadows as he stands up, his face flushed a deep, furious crimson. He ignores the tuxedo-clad usher who steps forward to politely guide him back to his seat. He shoves past the man marching straight down the center aisle toward the elevated stage. "Hold the sale!" Calvin bellows, his deep voice cutting through the sophisticated chatter of the ballroom like a jagged blade. The room falls dead silent. Hundreds of museum directors, hedge fund managers, and global investors turn their heads in perfect unison, staring at the man causing a scene at the most exclusive event of the season. "Stop this transaction immediately!" Calvin shouts, stopping right at the edge of the stage. He points a thick, shaking finger directly at Malik canvas still illuminated under the brilliant gallery spotlights. "There has been a massive legal error. That painting does not belong to Christie Auction House, and it certainly does not belong to whoever just bid on it." The auctioneer frowns, leaning into the microphone. "Sir, please return to your seat. The lot has been legally finalized and the hammer has fallen. Security will have to escort you out if you disrupt the proceedings." "I am not disrupting anything!" Calvin barks, planting his feet firmly on the carpet. "I am claiming my stolen property. That canvas is mine. It was a personal gift made specifically for my 60th birthday by my grandson. I am the rightful legal owner of that artwork. Therefore, that $4 million belongs directly to me and my estate. Kendra practically sprints down the aisle behind him, her rented silver gown shimmering as she moves. She is desperate, panting slightly as she reaches our father's side. She turns to face the crowd of billionaires, completely abandoning any shred of dignity or class. It is true, Kendra screeches, her voice echoing shrilly across the cavernous room. My sister stole it. She is a thief. She took that painting from our father house 8 years ago without his permission. We had no idea she was hoarding it all these years, just waiting to cash in. She stole from her own family. Trent is right on her heels, puffing out his chest and trying to project the authority of a tech mogul despite the fact that his credit card was declined for a steak dinner just 2 nights ago. He steps up next to Calvin, glaring up at the auctioneer. You are dealing in stolen goods, Trent declares loudly, making sure his voice carries to the private viewing suites above. We demand that you halt the transfer of that artwork immediately. You need to reroute the paperwork. My father-in-law is the rightful owner, and you need to cut the $4 million check directly to his corporate holding company. We are willing to overlook the auction house negligence in verifying the provenance if you process the funds to our accounts tonight. The sheer audacity is staggering. They are standing in a room full of the most powerful financial minds in the world, attempting to hijack a $4 million international art transaction through pure vocal intimidation. They genuinely believe that because Calvin is used to bullying local contractors, he can bully a global auction house into handing over a fortune. They are so blinded by the money that they have completely forgotten how the real world operates. Whispers erupt across the ballroom. Cell phones are pulled out. People are recording the spectacle. The Atlanta elite who have tolerated Calvin's arrogant real estate pitches for decades are now watching him completely unravel in real time. The auctioneer looks bewildered. He glances toward the wings, searching for the gallery coordinators. I do not wait for security to intervene. I step out from the shadows of the wings and walk directly into the blinding glare of the center stage spotlights. The emerald silk of my gown sweeps across the polished wood floor. My posture is absolutely rigid, my head held high. I walk past the masterpiece my son created and stop right next to the auctioneer podium, looking down at the three of them. The whispers in the crowd instantly die down. Calvin's eyes lock onto me. The smug, victorious look on his face morphs into pure, unfiltered rage. You! Calvin spits, pointing his finger up at me. Tell them, Zara. Tell this man to cut the check to my firm. Tell them the boy handed that canvas directly to me on my birthday. Tell them it was my gift. I look down at him. I look at Kendra, who is nodding vigorously, her eyes wide with a frantic, desperate greed. I look at Trent, who is crossing his arms, trying to look intimidating. 10 minutes ago, they were mocking my career, telling me to stand in the back and fetch their drinks. Now they are begging for the money generated by the disabled child they constantly ridiculed. I reach out and take the microphone from the auctioneer stand. The heavy metal feels cool against my palm. It is absolutely fascinating, Calvin, I say, my voice projecting smoothly through the massive speakers, amplifying over the entire crowd. It is fascinating how quickly your memory improves when there is a $4 million price tag attached to the narrative. Calvin's jaw clenches. Stop playing your little game, Zara. Tell them the truth. I am going to tell them exactly what happened, I reply, maintaining steady eye contact with him. Because you are right about one thing. My son Malik did hand you that painting on your 60th birthday. He spent 3 months mixing those acrylics. He walked up to you in front of 50 guests hoping to give you something beautiful. See, Kendra shouts, turning to the audience, spreading her arms wide. She admits it. It was a gift. It belongs to us. Trent smirks, stepping forward. Hand over the authentication paperwork, Zara. You are done. We are taking the money, and we are taking the canvas. I do not break eye contact with Calvin. The silence in the room is suffocating. Every single billionaire is hanging on my next word. He handed you the gift, Calvin. I continue, my voice dropping into a deadly calm register. But the auction house needs to know the complete chain of custody to process the funds. They need to know how the physical asset was handled. So why do you not tell the crowd exactly what you did with the painting after Malik handed it to you? Calvin freezes. The blood suddenly drains from his face. He remembers. He remembers exactly what he did, but his narcissistic brain never calculated that his actions would have legal consequences. Tell them, Calvin. I press, leaning slightly over the edge of the stage. You want the $4 million so badly. All you have to do is tell these investors how you secured the asset. Did you hang it in your study? Did you place it in a climate-controlled vault? That is none of their business. Calvin snaps, his voice wavering for the very first time. I accepted the gift. That makes it mine. Kendra looks between us, her brow furrowing. She was there. She laughed when he did it. But she is entirely unaware of property law. Dad, just tell them you put it away for safekeeping, she hisses loudly, grabbing his arm. Just say it so we can get paid. He cannot say that, Kendra, I state, my voice echoing through the ballroom, because that would be perjury, and we are standing in a room full of people who do not take kindly to financial fraud. Trent steps up to the edge of the stage, his face turning a dark, angry red. You are trying to steal from us, he yells, pointing directly at me. You stole a masterpiece from your own father to fund your little gallery life. You are a criminal. We will have you arrested right here tonight. I look at Trent. I look at Kendra. I look at the man who gave me his last name and absolutely nothing else. You want the truth to be known, Calvin, I ask, raising the microphone closer to my mouth. You want everyone to know the exact provenance of Lot 42. You want them to know how I acquired the rights to the most valuable contemporary piece sold this decade. Calvin stares at me, his breathing shallow, his eyes wide with a sudden creeping terror. He knows what I am going to do, but he is entirely powerless to stop it. I turn my back on them. I look toward the audio-visual control booth located at the back of the ballroom, and I give a sharp, definitive nod. It is time to show the world exactly what kind of man Calvin really is. The massive digital projection screen spanning the entire back wall of the auction stage flickers to life the exact second my nod registers with the control booth. The brilliant white light of the projector cuts through the darkness of the ballroom, casting long, sharp shadows across the faces of my family, standing at the foot of the stage. A collective intake of breath sweeps through the cavernous room. The sophisticated chatter of international billionaires and museum directors dies instantly, completely replaced by a stunned, heavy silence. The image, towering 20 feet high above the auction block, is not a blurry, hastily taken snapshot. It is a stunningly crisp, high-resolution photograph I took on my phone 8 years ago. The picture shows a silver champagne bucket sitting on the polished marble floor of Calvin's Buckhead mansion. Stuffed violently inside that bucket is the vibrant, chaotic canvas of Lot 42. Half-empty bottles of vintage champagne are pressed hard against the delicate acrylics. Wet, crumpled cocktail napkins cling to the gold and blue geometric swirls. The ice water pooling at the bottom of the bucket is clearly visible, seeping directly into the raw wood of the bottom right corner of the frame. It is an image of pure, unadulterated disrespect. To a room full of the world's most elite art collectors, people who treat contemporary canvases like fragile religious artifacts, seeing a masterpiece shoved into a garbage bin is absolute sacrilege. I watch the physical impact of the photograph hit Calvin. He staggers backward a full step, his polished leather shoes slipping slightly on the carpet. The blood drains completely from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, ashen gray. His mouth opens, but no sound comes out. He is staring up at the 20-foot-tall monument to his own cruelty. He cannot deny it. He cannot spin it. He cannot use his wealth or his deep voice to intimidate his way out of the narrative. The evidence is looming over his head, bright and undeniable. Kendra covers her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with absolute panic. She looks around at the wealthy audience members sitting in the front rows. She sees their expressions of deep, profound disgust. The elite social circles she has spent her entire life trying to impress are currently looking at her family like they are absolute monsters. Trent swallows hard, his Adam's apple bobbing sharply. He takes a slow, deliberate step away from Calvin, putting physical distance between himself and the man he was just vehemently defending. Trent is arrogant, but he is not blind. He realizes instantly that he just stood in front of the most powerful people in Atlanta and loudly defended a lie. I bring the microphone back to my lips, my voice echoing with absolute unwavering authority over the stunned crowd. This is the true provenance of Lot 42. I announce, my tone clinical and detached. 8 years ago, my 7-year-old autistic son spent 3 months painting this canvas. He carried it into a crowded ballroom and handed it to his grandfather as a birthday gift. The man standing before you took that gift, scoffed at it, and shoved it directly into a trash can used for discarded champagne bottles. He announced to a room full of his peers that he had no space in his home for cheap finger painting. He ordered me to remove my disabled child from his presence before we ruined his public image. A low murmur of genuine outrage ripples through the ballroom. I see a prominent hedge fund manager in the second row shake his head in sheer disgust. I see a museum director from Geneva whisper something sharp to her associate while glaring directly at Calvin. Calvin finally finds his voice, though it is entirely stripped of its usual booming power. "That is a lie," he stammers, raising a trembling hand toward the stage. "It was an accident. The painting slipped. I was going to retrieve it. You stole it before I could safely store it away." I press the button on my presenter remote. The giant screen behind me transitions instantly. The photograph of the trash bin vanishes, replaced by a stark black and white legal document. It is a certified court filing bearing the official seal of the state. "You did not accidentally drop a canvas into a bucket, Calvin," I reply, keeping my voice perfectly level. "You intentionally discarded it. And because your arrogant mind only understands the language of wealth and contracts, I am going to explain exactly why you have absolutely no claim to the $4 million this room just generated." I pace slowly across the edge of the stage, looking down at my family. Under Georgia property abandonment law, the moment an individual intentionally places an item into a designated trash receptacle, they explicitly and permanently relinquish all legal rights, title, and interest to that property. You threw the canvas away. You verbally declared it garbage in front of 50 witnesses. By your own actions, you severed your ownership. Kendra drops her hands from her face, her voice shrill and desperate. "You still took it from his house, Zara. That makes it theft. You cannot just take things from our property and claim you own them." I do not even blink at her ignorance. "Abandoned property belongs to the first person who legally reclaims it," I state firmly. "I reached into that ice water and I reclaimed my son's work. I walked out of your house and I became the sole legal owner of that physical asset. There was no theft, Kendra. There was only a mother rescuing her child's brilliance from a family that was too blind to see it." I press the remote again. A cascade of official documents fills the massive screen. Federal copyright registrations, trademark filings for the pseudonym MZ, certificates of authenticity from independent appraisers, notarized declarations of provenance. For 8 years, I have maintained an unbroken chain of custody, I declare, gesturing to the overwhelming wall of legal proof behind me. I registered the federal copyright solely in my name the very next morning. I secured the trademark. I insured the physical asset. Every single legal document tied to this painting has been bound to my corporate entity for nearly a decade. You have no bill of sale. You have no copyright. You have no proof of ownership because you threw your ownership into the garbage. Trent runs a hand over his face, looking like he might be physically sick. He is a man who loves to use legal jargon to sound intelligent, and he knows exactly what he is looking at on that screen. He knows the paperwork is completely airtight. He knows that Calvin has zero legal standing to halt the auction house transfer. You cannot retroactively claim an asset just because you finally realize its financial value. "Calvin," I say, stopping directly in front of him and staring down into his terrified eyes. "You do not get to call my son broken for 8 years and then show up tonight demanding to profit from his genius. You abandoned this masterpiece. You abandoned us, and the law explicitly protects us from your greed." Calvin opens his mouth to speak, but he has absolutely no words left. His chest heaves, his tailored tuxedo suddenly looking entirely too large for his shrinking frame. He is standing in the epicenter of the Atlanta elite, completely stripped of his power, his dignity, and his false narrative. He thought he could march up to the stage and use his deep voice to bully a global auction house into cutting him a check. Instead, he walked blindly into a meticulously documented legal execution. The silence in the ballroom is heavy and absolute. The investors and collectors are watching a tyrant being dismantled by his own discarded daughter. The $4 million bid stands perfectly legitimate and completely out of his reach. The power shift is total. Calvin real estate empire is collapsing. His creditors are waiting, and the one asset that could have saved him is legally locked away behind a fortress of copyright law and property rights that I built with my own two hands. The shock holding my family hostage finally shatters, and it is Trent who breaks first. The reality that his imaginary tech startup is completely dead and the endless bankroll he married into has evaporated is too much for his arrogant ego to process. His face twists into an ugly mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He cannot stand being outmaneuvered by a woman he has spent years belittling and condescending to. Trent lunges forward, planting his hands on the edge of the stage and attempts to hoist himself up. "You are not taking a single dime of that money!" Trent screams, his voice cracking wildly as it echoes across the cavernous ballroom. "We are filing an emergency injunction first thing Monday morning. I will personally sue you for fraud, Zara. I will sue you for theft and embezzlement. I will drag you through federal court until you are completely bankrupt. That $4 million is family property, and we are freezing the transfer tonight." I do not take a single step backward. I do not even blink. I stand my ground, looking down at him as he struggles against the polished edge of the platform. Before Trent can even swing his leg over the stage lip, the gallery security team descends. 3 massive men in tailored black suits step out from the wings, moving with terrifying synchronized speed. They form an impenetrable human wall at the front of the stage. The lead security officer places a heavy, authoritative hand directly on Trent's chest and forcefully shoves him backward. Trent stumbles, his expensive sneakers slipping on the carpet as he crashes hard into Calvin's shoulder. "Do not touch me!" Trent snarls wildly, adjusting his velvet blazer and pointing a shaking finger at the guards. "I am an investor. You are protecting a thief. I ignore his desperate flailing entirely. I turn my attention to the head of legal counsel for the auction house, a sharp-eyed woman standing just off stage who has been monitoring the entire exchange. I signal her forward. She walks over, her posture strictly professional. I reach into the hidden pocket of my emerald silk gown and retrieve a thick folded manila envelope. I hand it directly to her. "This is not a negotiation, Trent." I project my voice calmly into the microphone, making sure every billionaire in the room hears my response. "What you just witnessed is the transfer of a pre-filed legal notice. I had my corporate attorneys draft this documentation the moment you and Kendra barged into my gallery demanding VIP passes. I knew exactly how your greed would manifest tonight." Kendra grabs Trent, arm, her eyes darting frantically between the security guards and the legal counsel currently reviewing my paperwork. "What did you just hand her?" Kendra demands, her voice shrill and trembling. "What is in that envelope, Zara?" "It is your financial funeral, Kendra," I state evenly. "That folder contains a formal cease and desist order legally barring you, Trent and Calvin, from ever claiming ownership of Lot 42. It also contains a notice of intention to file a massive defamation lawsuit. If any of you utter my son's name in public, if you speak to the press, if you try to claim that I stole this artwork, or if you attempt to file a frivolous injunction to delay my funds, my legal team will immediately execute that lawsuit." Calvin's chest heaves as he stares up at me. He looks like a man suffocating in open air. "You cannot sue your own family." Calvin chokes out his voice, losing all its booming authority. "I can, and I absolutely will, I promise." Locking my gaze onto his terrified eyes. "I will sue you for slander and defamation of character. I will subpoena your financial records during the discovery phase. I will force you to open your books in federal court, and I will expose to the entire world that your real estate firm is bankrupt. I will show the judge that you are completely insolvent and desperate for cash. If you try to fight me for this $4 million, I will personally ensure that every creditor you are hiding from gets a front row seat to your financial autopsy." Trent goes completely pale. The bluster drains out of him in a single heartbeat. He knows that a highly publicized defamation lawsuit would trigger an immediate audit of Calvin firm. He knows that his fake tech startup would be scrutinized under oath. The threat of legal discovery is the ultimate poison to a fraudster. Trent slowly lowers his pointing finger, taking a deliberate step backward, retreating behind my sister. He is a coward masking as a conqueror, and the moment real legal peril is introduced, he cowers. The legal counsel for the auction house finishes scanning the documents. She nods firmly, stepping to the microphone. The auction house recognizes the sole legal ownership of the vendor she announces formally, her voice ringing with absolute finality. The transaction for Lot 42 is verified secure and legally binding. Calvin slumps heavily. The fight leaves his body entirely. He looks down at his shaking hands, realizing that the trap I set is completely airtight. There is no legal loophole. There is no bullying his way out. He is entirely defeated. But the night is not over. Just as the heavy silence of finality settles over the breathless ballroom, a sound breaks through the tension. It is the slow, deliberate sound of two hands clapping together. The rhythmic, powerful clapping echoes from the back of the auditorium near the grand VIP entrance. Every head in the room turns toward the noise. The sea of international collectors and hedge fund managers parts seamlessly, like a physical wave giving way to absolute power. Walking down the center aisle is a man who commands the room without having to say a single word. It is Sterling DuPont. He is a distinguished elderly African-American man, radiating an aura of quiet, untouchable wealth. He is wearing a flawless, bespoke suit that speaks to decades of old money and sharp investments. He walks with a silver-tipped cane, moving slowly but purposefully down the aisle. He does not look at the crowd. He does not acknowledge the whispers rippling through the wealthy attendees. His sharp, intelligent eyes are fixed entirely on the stage. Calvin whips his head around. The moment he sees Sterling DuPont walking toward the front row, the sheer desperation in Calvin's eyes reignites into a frantic, chaotic fire. He completely forgets the humiliation he just endured. He forgets that his daughter just dismantled him on a public stage. His survival instinct kicks in, overriding every ounce of dignity he has left. This is the billionaire venture capitalist he has been chasing for 3 years. This is the man who can save his sinking real estate empire from total foreclosure. Calvin practically scrambles forward, pushing past Kendra and Trent. He frantically smooths the lapels of his tuxedo, wiping the cold sweat from his forehead. He forces a wide, painfully fake professional smile onto his face, attempting to project the image of a successful peer rather than a drowning debtor. "Mr. DuPont!" Sir Calvin calls out, stepping into the center aisle to intercept the billionaire. "What an absolute honor to see you here tonight. I have been trying to reach your office all month regarding that commercial merger we discussed." Sterling stops walking. He rests both hands on the silver handle of his cane, looking at Calvin with an expression of profound glacial indifference. He does not smile back. Calvin swallows hard, his smile wavering, but he pushes forward, desperate to secure the narrative. "Please excuse this ridiculous family misunderstanding," Calvin says, letting out a hollow, nervous laugh, waving his hand toward the stage. "You know how emotional women can get during high-stress business transactions. My daughter is just overwhelmed. But I assure you, sir, everything is completely under control. Once my legal team clears up this little paperwork error and secures our $4 million from this sale, my firm liquidity will be fully restored. We will be perfectly positioned to finalize our merger by the end of the quarter." Trent steps up right behind Calvin, eager to latch on to the billionaire presence. "Absolutely, Mr. DuPont," Trent chimes in, pasting on his best sales pitch grin. "We are also launching a highly lucrative blockchain logistics startup that pairs perfectly with the real estate merger. We would love to get you in on the ground floor." I stand on the stage watching them grovel. The second-hand embarrassment is almost physically painful. They are begging a man for money while actively lying to his face, completely unaware that they are speaking to the architect of their final destruction. Sterling DuPont does not even look at Trent. He keeps his piercing gaze locked on Calvin. He slowly raises one hand, palm facing forward. The simple, silent gesture holds so much authority that Calvin instantly snaps his mouth shut, cutting off his frantic pitching. "You seem to be operating under a severe delusion," Calvin Sterling says, his voice deep, resonant, and carrying effortlessly through the quiet ballroom. "You are standing here, spinning tales about securing $4 million from this auction to fund your failing enterprise. You are assuring me that your capital will be restored once this transaction clears." Sterling takes one step closer, leaning slightly on his cane. His expression turns lethal. "But you cannot secure funds from a buyer who refuses to do business with you," Sterling states coldly. Calvin blinks, his fake smile finally collapsing entirely. "I do not understand," Sir Calvin stammers, taking a small step backward. "What do you mean?" "I mean that you are looking at the phone bidder," Sterling announces, projecting his voice so every investor in the room hears the revelation. "I am the man sitting in the private gallery suite. I am the one who just authorized the $4 million transfer for Lot 42. A collective gasp erupts from the front rows. Kendra lets out a tiny, shocked whimper, clutching her husband's arm. Trent's face goes completely blank, his jaw dropping open. Calvin sways on his feet, his mind desperately trying to process the magnitude of the disclosure. "You bought the painting," Calvin whispers, his voice trembling with terror. "You just paid $4 million for the canvas I threw away." "I did not just buy it tonight," Calvin Sterling corrects him, his tone sharp and unwavering. "I have been intimately aware of this artist for years. I saw the raw, unbridled genius in M's work long before the general public caught on. My private charitable foundation has been secretly funding Malik's specialized art development program for the past 2 years. I have been working directly with Zara to ensure that her brilliant son receives the absolute best accommodations, therapy, and creative resources available in the country." Sterling turns his head slightly, looking up at me on the stage. He gives me a warm, respectful nod, acknowledging the silent partnership we built to protect my son. I nod back, feeling an overwhelming wave of gratitude for the man who believed in Malik when his own bloodline refused to. Sterling turns his attention back to Calvin, and the warmth completely vanishes from his face. "I know exactly what this painting is," Calvin Sterling says, his voice echoing with absolute disgust. "I know the history of the champagne stain on the frame. Zara did not hide the truth from me. She told me exactly how you treated that boy. She told me how you ridiculed his neurodivergence and discarded his masterpiece to protect your pathetic, fragile ego." Calvin tries to speak, but no words come out. He is completely trapped under the burning, judgmental stares of his peers. "I value integrity above all else in my business partnerships," Sterling declares, raising his voice, addressing the entire ballroom. "I do not invest in men who lack vision. I do not partner with men who lie about their assets. And I absolutely will not ever do business with a man who throws his autistic grandson brilliance into the garbage." Sterling lifts his cane and points it directly at Calvin's chest. "Your real estate firm is officially blacklisted from my portfolio, Calvin, effective immediately. I have already instructed my board to sever any remaining ties with your holding companies. We are entirely done. The execution is total and absolute. The public blacklisting from Sterling DuPont is the final nail in the coffin." Every single investor, hedge fund manager, and bank executive sitting in the ballroom hears the decree. They all know that if Sterling DuPont blacklists a firm, that firm is essentially radioactive. Nobody in the city will touch Calvin real estate business now. The creditors will descend by morning, and the empire will be completely dismantled. Calvin's legs finally give out. He collapses backward, falling heavily into his velvet front row seat. His hands shake violently as he stares blankly ahead, completely ruined. He has lost his wealth, his reputation, his legacy, and his future in a single spectacular evening. Trent and Kendra stand frozen beside him, their faces pale with horror as they watch their infinite financial safety net evaporate into thin air. Investors sitting nearby literally stand up and physically step away from them, creating a wide circle of isolation around my family. They are completely exiled. I step down from the elevated stage, my emerald gown sweeping gracefully down the stairs. The security guards part, allowing me to walk directly up to my father. I do not yell. I do not gloat. I simply open my small evening clutch and pull out a crisp $10 bill. I drop the bill directly onto Calvin's lap. It lands softly against his tailored tuxedo trousers. Buy yourself a real trash can, Calvin. I say, my voice calm and perfectly steady. You are going to need it for Trent's startup. I do not wait for a response. I turn my back on the wreckage of my family and walk proudly down the center aisle. The crowd of global elites parts for me, offering respectful nods and quiet murmurs of awe as I pass. I push through the heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom and walk into the quiet grand lobby of the hotel. Waiting for me by the entrance, sitting comfortably on a velvet bench with his sketchbook in hand, is my son. Malik looks up, his bright, intelligent eyes catching mine. He gives me a small, genuine smile. I walk over, take his hand and squeeze it tightly. We walk out into the crisp Atlanta night air, leaving the ashes of the past behind us, heading home to our penthouse to celebrate his beautiful, boundless future. True value is never dictated by the validation of those who refuse to see your worth. This journey teaches us that sometimes the people meant to protect us are the ones who underestimate us the most. Instead of seeking approval from a toxic family, she built her own empire and shielded her gifted child. Financial independence and unwavering boundaries remain the ultimate weapons against manipulation. You must be brave enough to reclaim your narrative. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your peace? Share your story below, and please subscribe for more empowering daily videos.